Harold woke up every day at 6:30, even though there was no one to make coffee. The biological clock of a man who spent decades working on a railroad in Ohio never failed. Now retired and widowed, the silence in the house was louder than any locomotive horn. The smell of old wood and stacked newspapers was his faithful companion. Outside, only the sound of dry leaves dancing in the wind. Every morning was the same. A little instant coffee, unbuttered toast, and the newspaper he read from cover to cover, even though half the news was bad. Sometimes he wondered if anyone would notice if he simply disappeared. His daughter lived far away, and neighbors barely greeted him. He told himself that solitude was better than depending on others. Before I continue, I want to say that I ask God to bless you with all His infinite love, giving you much health, peace, joy, and faith, for we can never lose faith in God, for He will never abandon us, for His love is eternal and infinite. I also want to take this opportunity to ask that you like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me a lot, thank you. Now, let me tell you what happened to Harold, because his life was about to change in a way not even in the best movies. On that gray Wednesday, everything seemed to be business as usual, even the sound of the mail. He rarely received letters, bills came by email, postcards had stopped years ago. When Harold saw the yellowed envelope, something in his chest tightened. There was no sender, just his full name written in a shaky but familiar hand. He stood there, staring at the letter as if it were a bomb about to explode. With trembling hands and narrowed eyes, he tore open the side of the envelope. Inside was a trifold paper, scented with lavender and thyme. As he unfolded it, his eyes froze on one word, Evelyn. That was like an arrow straight to the chest. It had been over 50 years since he'd heard that name spoken aloud. And yet, not a single year had gone by without thinking about her. Evelyn had been his first love, back when Harold wore leather jackets and drove a '64 Chevy. They met at a summer fair, amidst cotton candy and country music. It was a quick, overwhelming love, forbidden by her parents. They planned to run away together, catch the train, and start over in another state. But something went wrong. Something Harold never quite understood. The letter read, "If you're reading this, it's because fate has finally decided to fulfill its promise." He reread the sentence several times. His heart was pounding so loudly he could barely hear the sounds around him. Was Evelyn still alive? Was she the one who had written it? Why now? Why after all these years? Life seemed to want to toy with what was left of his heart. Harold stood, folded the letter carefully, and tucked it into the pocket of his plaid shirt. He felt the weight of the words like lead. He went to the mirror and looked at himself, white hair, deep wrinkles, tired eyes. Would she recognize me, he wondered. Or worse, would I like what I find? Harold's mind began to pull memories like waves in the ocean. The blue dress she wore, the smell of strawberries in her hair, her laughter under the Ferris wheel lights. But he also remembered the day he went to the station, and she didn't show up. He waited for hours, holding 2 tickets. Then he waited for decades, holding an emptiness. And now, a letter broke the silence. He didn't speak to anyone that day. He simply walked to the garden, looked up at the gray sky, and whispered, "Lord, what do I do now?" Faith was his only solace. The open Bible on the table was still marked on Psalm 27, "Wait for the Lord, be of good courage, and let your heart take courage." Perhaps it was time to pursue that forgotten hope. That night, he placed the letter under his pillow as if it were an amulet. He slept little. He dreamed of Evelyn dancing beneath the lights, smiling with her bright eyes. When he woke, reality was cold, but the letter was still there. And with it, the possibility of a new truth. Perhaps everything he believed about the past was wrong. Maybe it was time to find out. The next morning, as he looked out the window, something changed in Harold. The sky was the same, the wind was the same, but inside him there was a new kind of restlessness. He needed to know more. He needed to discover what lay behind that letter. His heart, so accustomed to silence, now beat with questions. And all of them had a single name as an answer, Evelyn. He went down to the basement for the first time in years. The musty smell was unbearable, but he rummaged through old boxes, forgotten trunks, photo albums. He found an old letter he'd never sent, addressed to her. As he read it, tears fell like rain. "Why didn't I ever send this?" he murmured. Maybe because I was afraid of the answer. Or the lack of one. At the bottom of a blue box, he found a cassette tape labeled Our Summer. He took it to the old cassette player in the living room and pressed play. The music filled the room like a sweet ghost, Patsy Cline singing "Crazy." He closed his eyes. And it all came back like a movie. Her singing along, dancing in her socks on the carpet in her parents' living room. That sound, now, was a bridge to something bigger. The landline rang, interrupting his trance. Harold answered, expecting another advertisement. But it was a strange voice. A woman. "Are you Harold Whitman?" He answered yes. The voice hesitated. "I think we have something in common. Something from many years ago." The call dropped. He tried to return it, but there was no number listed. Coincidence? Or another chapter in this mystery? That afternoon, he went to the local library to look for old records. Newspapers, period photos, news from the town where he met Evelyn. He discovered that she had moved in 1969 to a small town called Maple Grove. A small, isolated place. And she had never married. This left him confused. Why had she disappeared? Why had she never looked for him? With the help of a friendly lady at the library, Harold found a clue, a mailbox registered to E. Green, in the same handwriting as the letter. It was active, at a rural address. He returned home with the address written down and his heart pounding like a 20-year-old. It was far, but not impossible. He had to go. If it was the last thing he did. He packed a small suitcase, put on the suit he wore on Sundays at church, and tucked the letter into his jacket pocket. Before leaving, he stopped in front of the mirror again. This time, he smiled. There's still time. He locked the door, looked up at the sky, and said, "Guide me, Lord." He knew the path was more than physical. It was a journey through the soul. On the way to Maple Grove, Harold stopped at a typical roadside diner. He ordered coffee and apple pie. As he ate, he heard an old song playing on the radio. It was the same one from the dance where he and Evelyn had their first dance. It had to be a sign. You're getting close, he thought. Fate was preparing something, and he could feel it in his bones. The road was long, but every mile seemed to quicken his heart. When he finally reached the entrance to the small town, a sense of déjà vu washed over him. The streetlights, the fences, even the wheat field next to the church, everything seemed frozen in time. He parked the car and spent a few minutes looking around. He took a deep breath. The past was there, and he was about to knock on its door. As he walked along the gravel path, Harold saw a simple house with a well-tended garden and a rocking chair on the porch. On the mailbox, E. Green. He hesitated. His hand trembled as he raised it to knock. But before he could touch the wood, the door opened, and a woman, her white hair tied back in a bun, stared at him. Time stood still, and the world breathed. The scene lasted seconds, but it felt like an eternity. She recognized him. A faint smile appeared, and tears filled her eyes. "You came," was all she could say. And Harold, unsure if he was dreaming or experiencing a miracle, replied, "It took a while, but I came." And in that moment, what was lost was found. But that was only the beginning. Because what Harold didn't know was that Evelyn held more than memories. She held truths that could change everything he believed about that summer of 1968. Secrets that were never told. Promises that were broken. And a story that still needed to be told. His life was about to be turned upside down, again. The morning after his reunion with Evelyn, Harold woke early, but the silence he'd felt before wasn't the same. There was something different in the air, as if the past had taken on a life of its own and invaded the present. He stared at the ceiling and wondered, did all this really happen? But there, on top of the dresser, was the letter. That first letter. The origin of it all. Without it, none of this would have begun. He picked it up carefully, like someone holding a rare piece of a sacred puzzle. He sat at the kitchen table and began rereading each word, this time with more attentive eyes. The content seemed simple at first glance, but now he saw details he hadn't noticed before. Small clues, enigmatic phrases, subtexts charged with feeling. Evelyn hadn't just written a letter. She had constructed an emotional map. One sentence in particular made his heart sink, What no one knew was that I was waiting too. It made him freeze. Waiting for what? For whom? For how long? He remembered the station, the day she didn't show up. But what if she was there? What if there was something he didn't see? A mix-up? A misunderstanding that changed everything? That piece of paper took on even greater weight. Determined to understand everything, Harold grabbed an old notebook and began jotting down every detail of the letter. Excerpts, dates, feelings. He tried to piece together a timeline of that lost summer. And the more he wrote, the more questions arose. The letter seemed to have been written in 2 different times. The ink in some parts was fresher, as if it had been completed at different times. Something was off. What he didn't know was that Evelyn had tried to send that letter many times over the years, but she never had the courage. He discovered this when, with teary eyes, she said, "I wrote the first part in 1971. Then I rewrote it in 1989. And I only finished it last month." 3 different eras. 3 versions of the same pain. A confession that came in pieces over the course of a lifetime. Evelyn had suffered in silence. Her father intercepted the first letter, her mother burned the second. The third was written after she survived a car accident that nearly left her paralyzed. It was then that she realized she couldn't die without telling the truth. And so, even without knowing where he lived, she used old contacts to find his address. And finally, she sent the letter. Without a return address. With hope. Harold was shocked to learn all of this. He had blamed himself for decades for something that perhaps had never been his fault. The questions that haunted him every night now had new layers. The past was no longer just a memory. It was a mystery. And Evelyn was no longer just a lost love. She was a survivor of a story that time had tried to bury. But there was more. Much more. Evelyn revealed that shortly after that summer, she had become pregnant. This revelation made Harold drop the teacup he was holding. He couldn't process it. "You had my child." She just nodded. "Yes. But not in the way you think." And that was when everything changed. Because the child was never born. And the truth about that was yet to come. What Evelyn told Harold next shook him deeply. She had been forced to go to a convent in another state, where she spent months alone. There, she lost her baby during her 7th month of pregnancy. No one in her family had spoken of it since. Everything had been hushed up. Silenced. And now, finally, she had the courage to tell him. The letter was the end of a silence that had lasted more than 50 years. They spent hours reliving every line of the letter. Evelyn explained why she used cryptic phrases. "I didn't know if you were still alive. Or if you hated me." Harold simply held her hand, trying to grasp the weight of it all. It was like watching a movie where every scene was a painful memory. Their pain woven into every unspoken word, every letter that never arrived. Evelyn also kept a box of newspaper clippings, train tickets, and even a lock of hair Harold gave her when they were young. It was all hidden in the attic. She said she never had the heart to throw it away. "Every time I tried to forget, something would bring you back to me." The letter was her last resort. Her last chance to be heard by the one she had loved since day one. But there was one more surprising detail. Evelyn wasn't the only one to write the letter. Part of it had been written by a nurse named Miriam, who cared for Evelyn during her recovery from the accident. Miriam, seeing her friend's suffering, offered to help her find Harold. She was the one who sent the letter. And she was the one who made the mysterious connection Harold received in the previous chapter. This revelation made everything even more complex. The nurse knew more than she was letting on. And perhaps she had her own reasons for getting involved in this story. Miriam disappeared soon after sending the letter. And Evelyn, though grateful, was never able to find her again. There was a strange feeling in the air, as if the letter were part of something bigger, something that went beyond Evelyn and Harold. Harold then decided to look for Miriam. But no one knew where she was. Not even medical records, nor did the hospital where Evelyn was treated, kept files on her. It was as if Miriam had vanished from the map. "Do you think she was an angel?" Evelyn asked. Harold smiled. "If so, she was sent with a very clear purpose." The letter was full of small miracles. But one last sentence of the letter still troubled Harold. It was written at the bottom, in a different handwriting, "The truth lies not only in what I've told you, but in what's still hidden." He read and reread it, trying to decipher what it meant. Evelyn didn't know what that sentence meant. He said he didn't remember writing it. But it was there, on a different type of paper, as if it had been pasted in later. This made him suspicious. Had someone tampered with the letter? Did anyone know their story? Who else would be interested in reopening such an old wound? Harold then decided to return home and go through all the mail from the past few months. Perhaps he had received something else and hadn't noticed. And there, among the leaflets and old bills, he found another envelope. No return address, but this time addressed to Mr. H. W. Father. The world spun. He opened the letter with trembling hands. Inside, only one sentence: "You don't know everything. I'm still here." And a photo. An old photograph of a pregnant woman, but with her face crossed out with a pen. It was Evelyn, without a doubt. But why would someone cross out her face? Who sent it? And most frighteningly, the date stamp on the envelope was 2 weeks before the first letter. Harold ran back to Maple Grove with the new envelope. He showed it to Evelyn, who turned pale. "I've never seen this before." She burst into tears. That picture was with me. But I lost it in 1990. This meant someone had access to her memories. Someone was watching. And someone wanted Harold to keep digging. Because the hole was much deeper. The couple then decided to seek help at the town's old church. The local pastor, a gentleman with a calm voice and deep eyes, read the letter, prayed with them, and said, "Sometimes God allows certain secrets to come to light so that healing can happen." Harold held the letter as if it were fire. "But healing from what?" he asked. The pastor smiled. "From something that has yet to be revealed. And perhaps it won't come from where you expect." As they left the church, a new envelope was waiting for them on the hood of Harold's car. No one was around. No signature. Just a single word written on it: "Dig it up." It was as if someone was guiding every step, or manipulating everything. And what was to come would be the biggest twist of all. In 1968, Harold was just a boy with the whole world ahead of him and his heart full of dreams. He worked as a train station attendant in Columbus, Ohio, and in his spare time, he played guitar at church youth meetings. Everything changed the day Evelyn showed up, wearing her blue dress and the smile that hid pain no one could see. She was new in town, and she was running from something. They met one Saturday afternoon at Mr. Roberts's grocery store, as she picked up a red apple and Harold, embarrassed, dropped an entire crate of oranges trying to impress her. Her first smile was shy but full of warmth. The connection was instant, as if two weary souls had finally found each other. From then on, they saw each other every day. Evelyn was only 17. The daughter of a strict pastor and an extremely conservative mother, she lived under constant surveillance. But with Harold, she felt free. In the fields behind the church, they talked about everything: faith, the future, fear, and even names for children they might never have. It was there, among the trees, that he promised, "One day we'll escape from here." Their love grew fast, intense, like a summer storm. But the closer they grew, the more aggressive Evelyn's father became. One night, Harold even got beaten just for walking her home. Still, he didn't back down. They were willing to face anything, even the world, if necessary. They just didn't know how much it would cost. In July of that year, they decided to elope. Harold bought 2 tickets to Chicago with his month's savings. The plan was simple. She would sneak into a taxi, meet him at the station at 10 o'clock, and together they would start a new life. But when the clock struck 10:30, Evelyn didn't show up. And when midnight struck, Harold knew something had gone terribly wrong. For years, he believed she simply gave up. That she lacked courage. That their love was just a beautiful but brief summer. But the truth, as he discovered after the letter, was much crueler. Evelyn had been locked in the house that night. Her father discovered everything and forcibly took her to a town 4 hours away. And there, the true nightmare began. She spent months without contact with the world. No radio, no phone, no books. It was like a silent prison, disguised as a spiritual retreat. Her mother said it was to cleanse her soul. But what they really wanted was to erase Harold from her memory. The punishment was both physical and emotional. And when Evelyn discovered she was pregnant, the chaos intensified. In an old notebook, hidden among old clothes, Evelyn wrote letters she could never send. Harold only saw them decades later, when she revealed them in a brown-covered album. "I searched for you in my dreams every night," one read. "And even without knowing where you were, I never stopped loving you." Words that cut deeper than any knife. Harold read each letter as if rediscovering parts of himself. That summer of 1968, he didn't just lose Evelyn. He lost faith in love. He believed he wasn't enough, that he wasn't worth truly loving. And these wounds shaped his entire life, his choices, his marriage to another woman, his way of seeing God and himself. Everything stemmed from that station, that bench, that waiting. But Evelyn also bore scars, and perhaps hers ran even deeper. She had suffered in silence, out of shame, fear, and imposition. She watched the world move on while she remained trapped in what could have been. The summer of 1968 wasn't just the beginning of a romance. It marked a rupture, an invisible line that separated who they were from who they would be. During a walk through Columbus, Harold took Evelyn back to the train station. It was night. The place was almost the same. The same broken clock, the wooden benches, the smell of oil. She stopped and looked at the exact spot where he had waited for her 57 years before. She was silent for minutes. Then she murmured, "I felt your presence, even though you weren't here." And then something unexpected happened. Evelyn revealed that night, she managed to escape from the room. She made it to the door. She saw the taxi waiting. But she froze. Something stopped her. Was it God? Harold asked. She shook her head. It was fear. And that confession devastated him. Because all he needed back then was to know that she'd tried. And now he knew. But the story didn't end there. Evelyn said that, months later, she tried to escape again. And this time, she succeeded. She reached Columbus and went to Harold's grandmother's house. But the house was empty. He had enlisted in the army that same month. She lost track of him. And there, yet another chance was snatched away from them by fate. The 1970s passed, and with them, Harold and Evelyn's traces faded. Each moved on, believing the other had chosen to forget. But both secretly carried the same feeling, regret. The unsent letters, the places not revisited, the birthdays where they wondered, what if? These were all shadows of 1968. Shadows that never went away. The most shocking thing of all was a photo Evelyn kept. In it, she and Harold, young, sat on a staircase, laughing. But behind them, in the reflection of the window, a mysterious figure appeared. A man. They had never noticed it before. Evelyn said this figure appeared in more than one photo, and always seemed to watch. The mystery wasn't just the past. It was what surrounded him. Harold took the photos to a retired photographer friend, and the analysis confirmed the man in the photos was the same. In every image, always in the background, and always looking at Evelyn. The question now was, who was he? And why was he present in so many moments that should have been theirs alone? When she showed the photo to the town pastor, his eyes widened. "I know that face," she said. He was the church gardener in the 1960s, a man named Samuel. But he mysteriously disappeared in 1970. The mystery deepened. What was a church gardener doing following a young couple in love? And why didn't Evelyn remember him? Later, Harold received a call from a woman named Nancy, who had watched an old video they had made of the story. She said, "I think I can help you. I met Evelyn in 1969, in a hospital." Evelyn froze at this. "Were you my roommate?" Nancy replied, "No. I was the nurse who took you to see the baby, before you passed out." The memory came flooding back. Evelyn had always believed the baby was stillborn. But Nancy claimed something completely different. The baby was alive. He was taken immediately by a tall, gray-haired woman, claiming she had a court order. This revelation turned everything upside down. Could their son be alive? Harold couldn't breathe. His hands were sweating, his mind was spinning. Everything he knew was being dismantled. And Evelyn, her eyes brimming with tears, whispered, "My God! Could it be that he looked for us and couldn't find us?" Now, the shadows of 1968 were becoming more than memories. They were living secrets. And one of them might be out there, waiting, searching, as they had done for a lifetime. In the old train station where it all began, the same smell of iron, aged wood, and longing still lingered. Harold and Evelyn returned there not just out of nostalgia, but because of a strange feeling that drew them in. There was something about that station that had never been explained. Something that seemed to disturb even the silence of the walls. They were about to find out why. As they walked along the disused tracks, Evelyn noticed something curious. A side door that had previously been locked was now ajar. It was an old control room, used decades ago. "I've never been in there," Harold said. But something about that opening seemed to beckon them. When they pushed open the door, the creak sounded like a scream trapped in time. And then, they entered. The room was dark and dusty, but there were stacks of boxes, old labels, and, on a table, a binder with names and dates. Harold began to leaf through it. Most of the papers were worn, but one index card caught his eye. Evelyn Green, July 12, 1968. She gasped when she saw it. "That's the date we were supposed to escape," he murmured. But why was her name there? In the corner of the file, someone had scrawled "Intercepted" in red letters. The word echoed in their minds like a sentence. The file also said, "Contact removed. Forwarded per protocol." Harold didn't understand right away, but Evelyn seemed to recognize something. "My father, he had connections with the railroad. He always talked about protocol. I thought it was just a figure of speech. But what if it was literal?" Even more frightening was finding another file, with Harold's name on it. The same date. But unlike Evelyn's, the observation field was blank. "Were they watching us?" he asked. Evelyn sat up slowly, pale. "It wasn't just my family. It was something bigger." The weight of what they'd discovered began to crush them. The station had been the scene of a covert operation. Further back, they found a padlocked box. Harold used a makeshift tool and managed to break it open. Inside were old photos, confiscated correspondence, and a recording. A reel-to-reel tape labeled Intic. Beside it, a handwritten note, filed by Samuel. Yes, the same Samuel from the photos. The gardener. Or was it something else? They took the tape to an old antique shop in town that still had old equipment. When they heard the recording, they froze. Muffled voices. Arguments. A man said, "The young man can't know. He has to think it was abandonment." And a woman, crying, begged, "Please, just let me see him one last time." It was Evelyn, in tears, begging for the baby. Harold was silent for long minutes. The tape confirmed that everything had been planned. Someone had stopped them from escaping. Someone had decided for them. And what's more, someone had watched every step. Evelyn looked at Harold with tearful eyes and said, "The station wasn't just where our story began. It was also where it was manipulated." The most distressing thing was knowing that, behind that seemingly ordinary station, there was a network of people controlling destinies. And no one ever told. Harold and Evelyn then decided to search for official records. They discovered that the station had belonged, in the 1960s, to a private logistics group with political ties. Many documents had been destroyed, but some survivors from that time were still alive. One of them was William Patterson, a former station supervisor. 92 years old, he lived in a nursing home. Harold went to visit him. Hearing their names, William's eyes widened. You were the young people on the gray list." He was trembling. "I was told you were gone." Evelyn replied firmly, "They tried to erase us. But we're here." And William, now weak, said, "The truth will hurt." William revealed that there was a list of young people monitored for behavior inappropriate to community standards. Evelyn was on the list for defying her pastor father. Harold was on the list for coming from a humble background and being involved in civil society movements. "They called it moral protection," William explained. "But it was control. pure and simple. The station was just a facade. Behind it, there were dark decisions. Among the hidden documents were also censored newspaper clippings, cut-out headlines, rejected letters, a clear attempt to erase voices that dared to love outside the rules. Evelyn held one of these clippings as if it were a piece of herself. They lied. But now the truth will come out. And Harold, in a firm voice, replied, even if I have to shout it to the world. Returning to the station, Harold glanced at the broken clock. It read exactly 10:15, the time he'd arrived that summer, waiting for Evelyn. But now, it seemed like time was finally turning again. They couldn't change the past, but they could rewrite history. Only there was one more thing that needed to be done. Something Evelyn had been putting off for decades. She needed to visit the place where the baby was born. It wasn't just a hospital. It was a former recovery center run by a religious institution. The building still stood, abandoned and overgrown. When they got there, Evelyn froze. Harold held her hand and said, "You're not alone." They entered together, and what they found there left them speechless. Inside a locked room, files were scattered on the floor, drawers were broken open, and a wall of newborn photos was displayed. Evelyn searched tirelessly until she found it. An envelope with her name on it. Inside, a birth certificate. But it didn't say stillborn. It read, "Viable boy, placed for emergency adoption." She fell to her knees. Her son was alive. The pain was so intense that Evelyn nearly fainted. Harold held her. The station, the foiled plan, the punishment, the convent, it all led to this. The baby hadn't died. He'd been taken. And now, more than ever, they had a purpose. To find him. To know if he was okay. If he'd had a good life. And if, perhaps, he was searching for them too. At the back of the room, a box of adoption records caught my eye. Dusty files, names covered with labels. But one detail caught my attention. Nurse Miriam's name was there. Again. Always her. Like an angel or a sentinel, she reappeared at the most critical moments. But why? Who was Miriam, really? With the help of a former acquaintance, they managed to track down her old address. But the place was abandoned. Still, they found a Bible with the name Miriam and Carter on it, and inside, a bookmark with a handwritten note, Romans 8 verse 28, "All things work together for good to those who love God." Evelyn wept as she read it. Perhaps, even in the worst moments, God was guiding everything. Harold then found, on the last page of the Bible, a name written, Noah Whitman. The same surname as his. Next to it, a date of birth. "Do you think?" Evelyn asked, unable to finish the sentence. Harold couldn't breathe. Maybe they had a real clue. A name. A glimmer of hope. But what they would discover in the coming days would change everything again. Because the station, the place where it all began and everything was distorted, hadn't said its last word. History still held greater secrets. And one of them was about to be unearthed. Literally. Harold's attic had always been a forgotten place, filled with dust, cardboard boxes, and memories that time had tried to bury. But that morning, after everything they'd learned about the station, Evelyn had a feeling. "We need to look up there," she said. As if something was calling to them, amid the old floorboards and the smell of the past. Flashlight in hand and heart pounding, Harold climbed the creaking stairs. Evelyn stayed close behind, gripping the edge of the railing as if about to dive into deep water. Deep down, she knew, whatever lurked up there could change everything. Once again. Among old toys, boxes marked with years of age in faded marker, and an old battery-operated radio, they found a navy blue trunk. Harold recognized it immediately. "That was my father's," he said. "He always said he saved things for a day that might never come." Well, that day had finally arrived. The trunk was locked with an old padlock. Harold used a key taped to the bottom of the lid. The dull click of the padlock sounded like the breaking of a spiritual seal. When they opened it, time stood still. Inside was a photo album neither of them had ever seen. It was the beginning of another surprising chapter. The cover was brown leather, with the word "Family" embossed in worn gold letters. Upon opening, the first photo showed Harold as a child, with his parents in the backyard of their old house. The following pages seemed like a timeline of his life. But halfway through, everything changed. Photos of Evelyn pregnant. Alone. Sitting in a church pew. Photos she'd never seen before. "This doesn't make sense," she said, her hands shaking. "These pictures, they're not mine. But they are me." The images looked like they were taken by someone following her. In one, she was lying in a hospital bed, visibly exhausted. "That was the night I lost the baby," she whispered. But there was more. In the next photo, she was holding a newborn. And she was smiling. Harold stared. "But you don't remember that?" Evelyn shook her head, confused. "I don't remember holding him. I was told he was stillborn." Their hearts raced. The photos were in chronological order, and the sequence showed, step by step, the reality that had been hidden for all these years. The truth the world tried to erase. In the last photo of the sequence, a woman was smiling and holding a baby in her arms. She was wearing a white uniform. "It's her," Evelyn gasped. "It's Miriam, the nurse who had disappeared. The same one who helped Evelyn. The woman in the letters. The figure who always appeared between the lines. And now, she appeared at the center of the story, holding a child. But something even more disturbing was yet to come. On the back of one of the photos was a note, delivered as instructed. Adopter's name, Richard N. Whitman. Harold froze. That was the name of his older brother, who died in a car accident in 1975. They had never been very close. But now, everything seemed connected in an unimaginable way. Harold was speechless. Could his own brother have adopted his son without him knowing? Evelyn was in shock. "This explains so much," she said. "Why my son disappeared. Why Miriam kept reappearing. Why everything seemed to be being monitored." Harold's family had participated in the cover-up, even if he never knew it. Over the next few days, they reviewed every detail of the album. Photos, notes, clippings. A veritable visual diary of a secret that had lasted more than 5 decades. Evelyn was particularly struck by one image, a child playing in a garden. The boy was about 6 years old and wearing a red cap. I feel like it's him," she said. "It's like my heart knows." Harold then called a distant cousin who had cared for Richard's belongings after his death. Cautiously, he asked if she remembered any adoptions. She hesitantly confirmed it. He and his wife adopted a boy soon after they returned from Colorado, but no one talked about it. It was like a pact of silence. The boy, she said, was named Noah. Noah, the same name found in Miriam's Bible. The same name that appeared in hidden notes. Now everything made sense. Harold and Evelyn were closer than ever. But there was a cruel question. Why hadn't anyone told the truth? Why all this web of silence and cover-up? What else was behind this story? With the help of a lawyer, Harold gained access to sealed adoption records. After weeks of waiting and bureaucracy, they finally received a document with their full name, date of birth, and current address. Noah Whitman, 39 years old. Married. Lives in Nashville, Tennessee. A grown man. A potential son. A missing link. Evelyn wept as she held the paper. "What if he doesn't want to see us?" she asked. Harold held her hand tightly. "Let's go with faith. God has brought us this far. He wouldn't abandon us now." And then they began planning the trip. But before they left, Harold had one last impulse. He went back to the photo album and noticed that one of the pages was glued together. Carefully, he used a razor blade to peel back the page. Hidden behind it was a photo of Evelyn and Miriam together, smiling, holding the baby. Behind the photo, a note written by Miriam, "If you ever find this, know that I did what I thought was right, and that love conquers time. It will find you." Signature, M. Harold closed his eyes. She knew. She always knew. And in that moment, they understood, the album wasn't just a record. It was a message. A silent promise. The truth, even hidden, always finds a way to surface. And they were ready for the next step. To finally meet the one the world had tried to keep from them. But what they didn't yet know was that Noah also had questions about his own past. And he was searching for answers. The album had been the key. But the next step would be the most delicate of all. Because finding a lost child again isn't just about DNA. It's about healing deep wounds. And not all scars are ready to open. Noah Whitman was a man of quiet habits. He worked as a librarian in Nashville, married to Emily, an art teacher. He lived a simple life, but carried a quiet restlessness he could never explain. From a young age, he felt something in his story that didn't add up. Dates were confusing, memories didn't fit, and a strange emptiness when I looked at certain childhood photos. His adoptive father, Richard, had died when he was still a teenager. And his mother, Anne, never liked to dwell on the past. "You were a gift from fate," she would say. But as the years passed, Noah began to notice the silences, the averted glances, the hidden papers. One day, he found a handwritten letter from a woman named Miriam. The letter didn't explain everything, but it said, "You were loved before you were even born." From then on, Noah began a silent search. He researched names, dates, old newspaper clippings. Something always led him to the state of Ohio, to a town called Columbus. He didn't know why, but the name Evelyn Green kept popping up here and there. And strangest of all, one day, during a service at Emily's church, the pastor read a passage that touched him deeply. It was Romans 8 verse 28. The same one from Miriam's letter. The same day Harold and Evelyn decided to write to Noah, he had already sent an email to a records office in Columbus. He was trying to discover its origin. When he received their letter, signed Harold Whitman and Evelyn Green, he was paralyzed. He read and reread it dozens of times. His heart raced. The truth was knocking at his door. Noah didn't respond immediately. He remained silent for days. He showed the letter to Emily. She cried as she read it. "You always said you missed something you never had," she said. "Maybe this is the time to find out what that is." Noah hesitated. He was afraid. Afraid of disappointment. Afraid it was an illusion. But inside him, a voice insisted, "Go." Harold and Evelyn, on the other hand, lived between anxiety and hope. They had sent the letter with care, explaining everything without pressure. "We just want to get to know you. Or at least give you answers," they said. They spent days checking the mailbox. And then, finally, he replied. A plain, white envelope, with a Nashville return address. Evelyn opened it with trembling hands. The lyrics were firm, beautiful, and filled with emotion. "I don't know what to say," Noah began. "But I want to listen. I want to understand." He proposed a meeting, in a neutral, quiet place. A public park in Lexington, Kentucky, halfway between them. It was like a balancing point for three hearts trying to find each other again. Evelyn wept. Harold silently thanked God. The day arrived. Evelyn wore a light blue dress, like the one from the summer of 1968. Harold donned his old gray suit jacket. On the car seat were the photo album, letters, and a Bible. They arrived at the park an hour early, unable to wait at home. They sat on a bench under a tree. The sun filtered through the leaves like a silent blessing. And then they saw a man approaching. Noah walked with firm steps, but with an anxious look. When he saw them, he stopped. The three stared at each other for long seconds, wordless, until Evelyn stood up, took 2 steps, and said, "I'm your mother." And there, in that moment, time stood still. Noah hugged her. A long, trembling hug, filled with silence and tears. Harold approached next. "I'm your father," he said. Even without knowing it. Even without being there. The encounter was more than emotional. It was spiritual. None of them knew quite what to say, but their eyes spoke for them. They sat together. Noah asked questions calmly, eagerly, and carefully. Evelyn answered with pain and truth. Harold explained everything he knew. They showed photos and reread excerpts from Miriam's letter. Each piece began to fit together, as if the sky had finally parted its clouds. Noah revealed that in his childhood dreams, he always saw a woman with her hair tied up and a blue dress. He never understood why. Evelyn sobbed when she heard this. It was exactly how she had dressed in her youth. He also said he had always felt an inexplicable connection to the train station. He had even drawn it several times as a child, without ever having seen it. The most impactful moment was when Noah's wife, Emily, arrived at the park. Upon seeing Evelyn, she whispered, "You look just like the woman in the photo he's kept in his wallet for years." Evelyn was moved. It was a blurry photo Noah had found in one of Richard's albums. He'd never known who it was. But now, everything made sense. The heart knew before the mind accepted. 4 hours, they talked, walked through the park, watched the falling leaves. Evelyn asked for forgiveness. Harold did too. Noah held no grudges. But there was a knot in his soul that only began to unravel at that meeting. It was as if a part of him, always incomplete, had been found through tears and prayer. Before they said goodbye, Harold handed her the Bible Miriam had left. She believed that love conquers time, he said. Noah held the book reverently. And I believe that God sews together what has been torn, he replied. Emily wept silently. Evelyn held his hand as if holding onto a second chance. The sun was already beginning to set when they decided to take a photo together. A simple gesture, yet loaded with symbolism. Father, mother, and son, finally together. And in that photo, there was no shadow behind. There were no mysterious figures. Just 3 smiles, 3 stories, 3 healed hearts. But there was still something Harold needed to do. Something that had been kept hidden for too long. After the meeting, Harold called the only surviving member of his family who might know something, his Aunt June. A stern woman of few words, she sighed when she heard the name Noah. "I knew one day this would come out." She told him she was the one who convinced Richard to adopt the baby. She thought she was saving the child. "I did what I thought was right," she said. But now she understood that silence had hurt more than it had protected. Noah, for his part, began keeping a journal. In it, he told the story of the encounter, the search, the pain, and the miracle. He said he wanted, one day, to tell this story to any children he might have. So they would know that, even when all seems lost, truth finds its way. And that love, when it's real, survives time, distance, and oblivion. Evelyn and Harold returned to Ohio with a new purpose. No longer just to remember the past, but to rebuild a future. They began attending church together. They made new friends. They relearned how to laugh, how to cook, how to slow dance in the living room. Life took on new hues. And each morning began to taste like a new beginning. But not everything was easy. There were days when Evelyn cried looking at old photos. Days when Harold lost himself in thought and silence. But now, they had someone to share these moments with. And that made all the difference. Reuniting with Noah didn't erase the scars. But it gave them meaning. Like stitches in a divine tapestry. One Sunday during worship, the pastor said, "Sometimes God allows pain to break us, only to later use us as a testimony of healing." Harold held Evelyn's hand. And she smiled. Because, for the first time in a long time, they were no longer fragments. They were a story. And they were ready to tell that story to the world. But little did they know, there was still more to be discovered. Because Noah had secrets too. Things I hadn't told him. Voices he heard. People he saw. Letters he received, and never had the courage to open. Noah was in his home office, reviewing old emails, when the landline rang. He wasn't expecting calls at home, he only used his cell phone. He took a deep breath before answering. A soft female voice simply said, "Are you Noah Whitman?" He swallowed and cautiously replied, "Yes." "Who is this?" The voice hesitated for a second that felt like an eternity. "You don't know me, but you know who I am." Noah's heart raced. "I do," he answered slowly. "Are you Miriam?" There was a deep pause. "Maybe," she whispered. "But I'm not just Miriam. I'm the one who kept your beginning." "Noah, listen carefully." The voice was firm now, but also weary. "There are secrets that have never been told. Questions you will still ask." He tightened his grip on the phone. "Can you tell me what you know?" The voice took a deep breath. "You need to go to Maple Grove. Tomorrow at noon. I'll be waiting." And the call ended without further explanation. Noah stood there, motionless, staring at the phone. The silence was deafening. He knew this was more than a chance encounter. It was a calling. A step into a mystery that still pulsed in the past. He texted Evelyn and Harold at the same time. "I got a strange call. They said Maple Grove. Tomorrow at noon. I think it's important." Evelyn replied almost immediately, "We'll go with you." Harold replied too, "Don't go alone." And Noah felt he was no longer alone. The next day, they drove together to Maple Grove. It was a silent drive, heavy with anticipation. Noah stared out the window, as if he could see clues in the green fields, the old houses, the worn streetlights. The road seemed longer than it actually was. When they arrived, Noah saw an old house next to the church. A window with a fluttering white curtain. It was it. The house Miriam had lived in for many years, according to reports. They parked and got out. Every step there was filled with memories. The wind seemed to whisper secrets. The door was ajar. Harold pushed it open slowly. On the floor, a wooden staircase creaked. Inside, furniture was covered with white sheets. A stopped clock read 12 o'clock. Exactly. They crossed the room. And then they heard a voice upstairs, on the second floor, "I knew you would come." They climbed, the sound echoing off the ancient walls. When they reached the hallway, a door at the back opened. There was a table scattered with papers and letters. And on it, a woman, her back to him, staring out the window. When he turned, Noah nearly fell. It was Miriam, or someone very much like her. Gray hair tied back in a bun. Eyes that held pain and memory. "You came," she said, her voice frail. "I've had to wait for this moment for so long." Evelyn nearly sobbed. "Miriam, why did you do all this?" The woman looked up and smiled sadly. "Because I had to protect you and her. And him." She pointed at Noah, then at Evelyn. But protection also requires silence. That's when the first twist came. Miriam revealed that she had written the original letter, but the final part had been altered. "Someone interfered," she said. "They messed with the envelope. They crossed out words. They included sentences." Evelyn paled. "Who would do that?" Miriam sighed. "Someone close to you. Someone who believed certain truths should never come out." The second twist came when Miriam mentioned a tape recorder hidden in the room. "I heard conversations from here decades ago. I recorded everything. It's there." She pointed to a bookshelf. A cassette tape sat there, labeled 1972. Harold picked up the tape, hands trembling. He knew listening to it would rip open wounds, but he had to. Noah put the tape into a makeshift portable recorder. The recording began with a male voice. "She can't know. She has to forget." And then a female voice sobbed, "But she's our daughter." It was Evelyn. And right after, "He's her father." Harold's voice. The rest was muffled. Tapes of evidence. Pieces of buried truth. The copy of the recording was handed to them. Miriam insisted, "Keep this tape. It proves much more than you think." Evelyn closed her eyes as tears began to flow. Noah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what this moment held. "Why now?" he asked. Miriam closed her eyes. "Because it's time." But the third twist was yet to come. Miriam revealed that she wasn't ill by chance. She suffered from a degenerative condition that was causing her to gradually lose her memory. And she'd kept those voices bottled up for decades, fearing that if she spoke, no one would believe her. Now, time was against her. And she needed the truth to come out before her memory faded. Noah took her hand. "I believe you." Miriam smiled with difficulty. "You'll see, much of what's missing will still be revealed." Evelyn asked, "Can you show us the documents you had in that room?" Miriam went to an old drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside were photos, letters, receipts, recordings. They spent hours in that house, absorbing every detail. Documents linking Evelyn's father to undercover operatives, railroad records, unregistered adoption correspondence. Each piece of paper was a piece of a puzzle that became increasingly clear. The ringing phone was the trigger for this moment. As they were about to leave, Miriam asked for a moment. She stood in the doorway, looking at the group. Promise me you'll use this to rebuild, not to destroy." Harold said firmly, "I promise." Evelyn nodded. Noah leaned closer and said, "Thank you. For everything." And she replied softly, "If it's too much, forget me. But don't forget me." They left the house, their eyes watery but stronger. Miriam stood in the doorway as the shadow enveloped them. Her voice echoed, one day you will understand everything." And in that promise remained a shadow of suspense, a cliffhanger for what was yet to come. On the way back, the car was silent for a while, each one absorbing what they had discovered. Noah watched the house move away in the rearview mirror. Evelyn clutched the recording tightly. Harold gripped the steering wheel as if to contain his emotions. They knew that day wasn't the end of the story. It had merely opened a new act. Noah said softly, "The voice on the phone brought me here." And that voice, it was a bridge between what was hidden and what will be revealed. Evelyn nodded. "And now we have to go." Harold sighed. "We have to go wherever Miriam takes us." A deep silence fell in the car. And the truth, though worn by time, lived on. On the way to the next chapter, there were still secrets that no letter had revealed, no album had shown, no encounter had uncovered. But the voice on the phone had been the threshold. The moment when past and present collided. The decision was made at breakfast the next morning. Evelyn, with a cup of tea in her hands, looked at Harold and said, "We need to go back there." Harold understood immediately. There meant the place where it all truly began. Not just the train station, but the city where she was taken, where her son was born, where the pain and secrets took root like deep roots. Maple Grove was just a piece on the board. The town Evelyn was forcibly taken to in 1968 was called Elmbrook, and it was almost 6 hours away. A place forgotten in time, with narrow streets, old buildings, and a decommissioned hospital surrounded by untold stories. Evelyn had avoided that name for decades. But now, I felt I had to face it. Noah, even without knowing exactly what they would find, offered to go along. "If this is the story that made us, I need to know it," he said. The trio prepared for the trip as if they were heading into an emotional battlefield. Evelyn took the letters. Harold took the tape recording. Noah took Miriam's photo album and Bible. Everything represented fragments of a greater truth. During the journey, the atmosphere inside the car was different from other trips. It wasn't fear, nor exactly anxiety. It was reverence. Like someone who knows they're about to step on sacred ground, not because it's holy, but because it's been the site of deep scars. Evelyn looked at the road as if recognizing every curve. "This is where they brought me, in a car with tinted windows," she said. Upon arrival, the impact was immediate. The hospital was still standing, but overrun with weeds and silence. Broken signs, boarded-up windows, and a gate that creaked in the wind. Evelyn held Harold's arm tightly. "Here is where they told me my baby didn't survive." Noah looked at the building with eyes searching for childhood. It was as if the air there carried echoes of everyone's pain. They entered cautiously, flashlights in hand. Inside, the building was a maze of memories. Abandoned rooms, damp corridors, yellowed papers still stuck to clipboards. But it was in the basement that they found the unexpected. A small, locked room with a rusty sign reading, "Special Records, Sector B." Noah, without hesitation, broke down the door with an iron bar he found along the way. Inside was a metal cabinet with numbered drawers. Each drawer bore names. Evelyn searched for hers, trembling. When he finally pulled out the folder marked Green E, his heart nearly stopped. There were documents that had never been shown to him. Medical reports, forged signatures, a baby delivery certificate dated a week after birth. Evelyn began to cry silently. Noah picked up the document with his name on it, recognized his birth date, and there it was, adopted under emergency protocol. But the most shocking part was a small stamp in the corner, Project Guardian. Evelyn's eyes widened. "My dad mentioned that name, but he always said it was a church thing." Harold frowned. "This seems bigger than just an adoption." The trio decided to search for the name Guardian Project in old city newspapers available at the municipal library. With the help of an elderly librarian, they found a series of censored reports from the 1970s. The project involved secret adoptions of children considered morally endangered, an unofficial policy driven by influential religious and political leaders. Evelyn held the page as if it were burning. Noah discovered there that he was not alone. Hundreds of children had gone through the same process. Some were taken out of state. Others were never found again. The most painful thing was knowing that many of the parents never knew their children were alive. Harold closed his eyes and said softly, "Lord, what else are we going to discover?" Evelyn asked to go to the room where she was admitted. With the help of an old interior map, they were able to locate it. The door was partially open. When they entered, Evelyn touched the wall as if it were skin. "I screamed every night, and no one heard me." Noah placed his hand on her shoulder. "I hear you now, Mom." It was the first time he had called her that. And the tears came. On the bedroom wall, scrawled in charcoal, Evelyn had written something, "I have not forgotten." It was like a scream trapped in time, a promise to herself. She wept when she realized that time had not erased her pain. But now, that very space that had imprisoned her served as the stage for a reunion, not with the baby she lost, but with the woman she was, the one she had been forced to silence. Noah then suggested they leave something there as a symbol of redemption. He took a small wooden cross he had made himself from his backpack. He nailed it to the wall, where Evelyn's inscription was. "Now it's marked with faith, not just pain," he said. Evelyn smiled, her eyes red. "Thank you, son." And Harold, in the background, whispered, "Thank you, God." Leaving the hospital, they passed the church where Evelyn's father preached. It was closed, but Evelyn wanted to take a walk around. "He taught me to fear God, but today I understand that God has nothing to do with fear." Harold took her hand. "God is love, and love always returns." Noah looked up at the sky, as if waiting for an answer. They found a marble plaque in the church garden bearing the names of former members. And there it was, Miriam Carter. Evelyn fell to her knees. "She was buried here," she said in shock. Beside it, a freshly laid flower. Someone was still visiting her. A mystery within a mystery. Noah approached and read the inscription, "Keeper of the Forgotten. God knows, even when the world did not." No phrase could be more accurate. The trio returned to the car with more than documents. They returned with answers. With memories they hadn't known existed. And with the certainty that the past wasn't over, it was just dormant. "Now that we know, what do we do with it?" Noah asked. Evelyn answered without hesitation, "We tell. We show the world. Because no one can be silenced like that anymore." The journey back was lighter. Even with all the pain, there was now a purpose. Evelyn knew her suffering could save others. Harold knew his absence in the past could be compensated for by his presence in the present. And Noah, he knew his origins were complex. But now, for the first time, he felt whole. Noah began writing articles about forced adoptions. Evelyn gave her testimony to an NGO that helps families unjustly separated. Harold began helping in support groups for men who had lost contact with their children. Each, in their own way, transformed pain into action, grief into testimony, silence into voice. And in the midst of all this, they received an anonymous letter. It simply said, "The project isn't over yet. And someone is watching." Evelyn held the paper and felt a chill. But she was no longer afraid. "You can watch. We're together now." And that was the most powerful truth the trio could carry. It was a Sunday morning when Evelyn felt a strange urge to write. It wasn't exactly sadness. It was a serene, almost prophetic feeling, as if something inside her said, "It's time." She sat in her rocking chair with her favorite pen and cream-colored paper. And there, unhurriedly, she began to write what would be her last note. It wasn't a goodbye, nor a letter of pain. It was a simple note, straight to the heart. "If you ever find this, it's because time has done its work. And now, all that remains is love." Evelyn folded the paper delicately. She placed it in a small wooden box and tucked it away in the back of her closet, among old books. Something about it told her someone would find it one day. 2 weeks later, Evelyn felt slightly dizzy during the service. Harold caught her before she fell. They went to the hospital, underwent tests, and were observed. The doctor spoke carefully. Her heart is fragile. There's no urgency, but there are signs. Evelyn smiled sweetly. I think my heart is just too full, after holding so much for so long. Noah began visiting more often. They would sit together in the garden, reading, talking. Evelyn would say, "Now that I know who you are, I can finally see you." And Noah would respond, "Now that I've found you, I can recognize myself." It was a process of mutual healing. Each embrace was an invisible glue over the cracks of time. Harold watched everything with gratitude. Even with his silent concern, he felt they were living the most real days of their lives. Evelyn laughed more often. She spoke of Miriam, of the letters, of her faith. She read scriptures aloud, "Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." Psalm 90 verse 12. She was ready. But no one could have imagined what was to come. On a cold September night, Evelyn fell asleep earlier than usual. She was serene, covered up to her chin, the window ajar. The wind gently swayed the curtains. Harold came upstairs with a mug of tea, but when he called her, there was no answer. The silence at that moment was deafening. He came closer. You touched his hand. It was cold. Evelyn had passed away, peacefully, in her sleep. The pain was immediate. But it wasn't despair. It was like a calm river flowing soundlessly. Harold held her hand, kissed her forehead, and said, "You taught me what love is, and now you teach me what it means to let go." Noah arrived minutes later. Upon seeing the scene, he fell to his knees. He cried like a child. Like a son who loses a mother for the second time, but this time, for real. During preparations, they found the wooden box in the closet. Inside, the note. Harold couldn't read it himself. He asked Noah to read it aloud. "If you're reading this, then God felt I'd already accomplished my mission. I loved you before I even knew your name. And now that I know you, my heart can rest. My son, never doubt, you were the miracle that sustained me in silence." The note continued, "And Harold, you were my home. Even when everything was falling apart, I knew I would one day return to you. Thank you for waiting for me, even without knowing it. I loved you every day of my life. And now, from where I will continue to love you with a healed body, a new heart, and eternal peace." At the end, an underlined sentence read, "Love is stronger than death." The wake was simple but moving. Many people from the town came. People who had heard the story. Neighbors, church members, even strangers who had followed the story through Noah's posts. Evelyn was buried wearing a blue dress, with Miriam's Bible on her chest. A sunflower was placed in her hands. Heaven seemed to be listening that day. But what no one expected was the envelope that arrived the next day. Addressed to Harold and Noah. No return address. Stamped, Project Guardian. Inside, a short letter. She knew more than she was letting on. Be careful what you decide to expose. The story isn't over. Signed simply with the letter S. The mystery hadn't died with Evelyn. Noah decided to continue investigating and telling the story. Now, more than ever, he felt the need to honor the mother who had fought alone for so long. He posted the note as a tribute. And the response was immediate. Thousands of people commented. They shared it. They cried with him. Evelyn had become a symbol of faith, strength, and motherhood that transcends time. Harold, even in mourning, found purpose in continuing to live. He bought a small house in the countryside and planted a garden in Evelyn's name. There, he received visits from mothers who had also lost children. He told his story with tears and hope. And he always said, no matter how long it takes, truth finds its way. And love, oh love, always returns. One afternoon, Noah went into the garden. He sat next to Harold. He looked up at the sky and said, "She's here." And Harold replied, "She always was. Only now can we see her." They sat in silence, listening only to the sound of the wind in the leaves. As if Evelyn were still whispering among the branches, "Thank you for not giving up on me." And it was in this garden that Noah wrote the last pages of his book. He called it The Last Ticket, not as an end, but as a promise. A promise to continue seeking justice, to continue telling the stories of mothers like Evelyn, of sons like him. Pain became a mission. And Evelyn became eternity. But the envelope with the S stuck in their minds. Who else knew? Who was still keeping secrets? Was it someone from their family? From the church? From the hospital? And what would happen if they decided to post everything? The danger was real. But silence, once again, would be unacceptable. Noah organized a discreet press conference with trusted reporters. He presented documents, recordings, and photos. But he withheld dangerous names. For now, he said, there are still loose ends. But the world needs to know there was an Evelyn. And that there are others. Harold watched from afar, his eyes welling up. Evelyn would have been proud. The final note was printed, framed, and placed in the living room of Harold's new home. Beside it was a photo of a young Evelyn, smiling, her eyes shining. When visitors arrived, he would say, "That was my wife." And that was the woman who, even in silence, moved mountains. People wept. And listened. Noah created a foundation in Evelyn's name, Guardians of Truth, to help adopted children reconnect with their origins and mothers share their stories. Once a month, he would read the note at in-person meetings. Whenever he read the final line, "Love is stronger than death," the entire room fell silent. The kind of silence that heals. And then, one rainy dawn, Harold got a call. The voice was male. Gravely, "You're going too far. Stop." And he hung up. The mystery lingered. Evelyn was gone. But the secrets she'd faced still lingered. And the promise in the note still pulsated. Like an eternal echo. Spring arrived like a gentle whisper in Ohio. Evelyn's garden bloomed with a power Harold had never seen before. As if nature itself knew this woman had left a deep mark on the earth. Harold walked among the sunflowers and said softly, "You're still here." And indeed, in every flower, every color, every silence, she was. Noah, now officially a published author, traveled the United States giving lectures on identity, faith, and reconnection. But in his heart, there was something unfinished. A promise. Evelyn, before she died, had said, "Find the others. Tell them they are not alone." It echoed in his soul. He knew their story couldn't end there. An unexpected email arrived in his inbox. Titled, "Guardian Project, List Leaked." It was anonymous. An attached file contained names, dates, and identification numbers. Over 300 children removed between 1965 and 1982. Noah was paralyzed. It was the key to fulfilling Evelyn's promise. But it was also an invitation to danger. He took the file to Harold. Together, they spent nights cross-referencing names, searching for records, calling people. Some refused to talk. Others cried on the phone. Many said, "I always knew something was wrong." It was like opening a collective wound that never healed. And at the same time, it was like turning on lights in attics that were too dark. The first family reunited was that of a woman in Montana. She believed her baby had died in childbirth in 1973. But now, thanks to the archive, Noah has found the man, alive, married, and with 3 children. When they were reunited, they simply hugged and cried. The promise was being fulfilled, one miracle at a time. Harold watched it all with quiet pride. But he also felt there was something more he needed to do. At the bottom of the drawer, he found a letter he had written to Evelyn in 1969, but never sent. He decided to read it aloud at a meeting of the Guardians of Truth Foundation. Every word was a confession, and every tear a release. In the audience, a young woman named Sarah stood up and said, "My father might be one of those sons. My grandmother always talked about a missing baby." Harold stepped off the stage, hugged her, and promised, "We'll find out." That rekindled something in him Evelyn had always seen, the ability to fight for others, even when it was easier to remain silent. On one of his trips, Noah was approached by a man who said, "You're poking powerful people." He handed him an envelope. Inside were photos of Evelyn and Miriam, and a letter with veiled threats. Noah took it to the police, but received no support. It was as if a part of the system was still compromised. But he didn't back down. They began filming a documentary. showing real-life stories, testimonies, and emotional encounters. Each story revealed was a step closer to bringing justice to Evelyn, Miriam, and all the forgotten women. The documentary gained national attention. And with it, the pressure mounted. One night, Harold received a message, "You'll regret continuing." But he responded with only a photo of the flower garden and a sentence, "We've already lost too much. We won't lose heart." The world needed to know. And Evelyn couldn't just be a pretty memory. She was the symbol of a movement. Noah discovered that Miriam's name appeared on documents from a charity that had gone bankrupt in the 1980s. Cross-referencing data, he found records of donations made in the name of Children of Hope. It was as if Miriam had discreetly tried to help others before disappearing. She, too, had made a promise. And now, through them, she was fulfilling it. At a vigil organized by the foundation, dozens of mothers lit candles with the names of their missing children. Each flame was a prayer. Each name, a pain transformed into purpose. Harold spoke to everyone. "We promise that the truth will not be buried. We promise for Evelyn." And the sky, that night, seemed to listen. The final surprise came in the form of a phone call. An elderly woman named Ruth claimed to know Evelyn's father. "He repented," she said. "Before he died, he left a diary." Ruth sent the notebook. In it, the pastor wrote, "I made a mistake trying to protect. Silence was my greatest sin." It was too late for an apology, but not for understanding. Noah read every page as if he were hearing his grandfather for the first time. He understood that pain spans generations, but regret can also be inherited. The letter ended with, "If my granddaughter ever hears of this, tell her I saw God in your strength." Evelyn had never read it. But now, her son did. And the cycle was complete. On Evelyn's birthday, they held a ceremony in the garden. They placed a plaque with her final words, "Love is stronger than death." Hundreds of people came, each with a story, each with a hope. The promise was being fulfilled, alive, strong, real. Harold, now in his 80s, continued to receive visitors, write letters, and listen to mothers. The house became a shelter, a place where pain was not ignored, but transformed. "If Evelyn taught me anything," he said, "it was that pain needs to be embraced and then released." Noah wrote a second book, The Promise Fulfilled, an account of reunions, discoveries, and scars. But he made it clear, there is still much to do. Because the system that separated Evelyn from her son still had roots. And as long as there is a mother without answers, the fight continues. But what no one expected was the letter that arrived from Europe. A woman, identifying herself as the daughter of one of the nurses involved, sent copies of previously unpublished documents, reports, photos, and a new list. Harold opened the envelope and said, "We still have work to do." Noah nodded. "We'll see it through. Just like we promised." And even with Evelyn's physical absence, it was as if she were leading everything from somewhere. As if every page turned, every name found, every tear wiped away, was an extension of what she began when she wrote her last note. The promise still pulsed. Noah began teaching at universities. He said, "Don't just study the mistakes of the past. Study the silences. Because it is in them that the greatest crimes hide." Students wept. Professors applauded. But in the end, all he wanted was for no one to go through what his mother went through. Harold looked at old photos in the late afternoon. He saw Evelyn as a young woman, with a smile that made him promise eternal love. And he said, "I kept it, my love. I'm still keeping it." Because, as she herself wrote, love doesn't end. It just changes form. It continues. It persists. And transforms. Noah visited Evelyn's grave in silence. He brought flowers, prayed, and read passages from the Bible. Once, he left there the draft of his third book, She Found Me. Because in the end, that's what happened. One woman faced the world in silence. And found her son. And changed the course of many lives. The promise wasn't just fulfilled. It was multiplied. Like seeds thrown to the wind that sprout in fertile soil. Evelyn was the first flower. But now, the garden was full. Of names. Of stories. Of healing. And of hope. And deep down, Deep within the story, something still beat. Like a heart. Like an echo that hadn't finished speaking. Because even after all this, there was still more to come. If this story touched you in any way, take a deep breath for a moment. Because now I need to ask you, how many truths are still buried inside you? How many promises were made, but never kept? How many silences, disguised as everything's okay, still hurt when no one is around? Maybe you know someone like Evelyn. Maybe Yut is an Evelyn. Or a Harold. Or even a Noah. Someone who had to move on without answers. Someone who thought it was too late, and yet decided to try. And do you know what this story shows us? That it's never too late to love, to forgive, to start over. God never wastes pain. Every tear waters a future you don't yet know. And what seems like the end, may be just the beginning of a promise being fulfilled. Evelyn thought she had lost everything. But in the end, she found more than she could have imagined. Because where there is faith, there is a path. Where there is love, there is return. And where there is courage, there is a miracle. Now tell me, have you ever felt like something was missing from your story? If you could write a letter to someone who has made an impact on you, what would you say? And if you had the chance to rediscover a lost part of yourself, would you have the courage to open that door? Comment below. I read everything with care. And share this story with someone who needs to know that time doesn't erase true love. And before I go, I want to say a prayer for you who have followed me this far. May God bless you with all His infinite love, giving you strength, health, comfort, and hope. May the healing truths find a place in your heart. And may you never forget, you are loved. And you are not alone. If this story resonated with you, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. This helps me continue telling stories that touch deeply and transform lives. Also, hit the bell, because there's still so much more to come. Now, close your eyes for a moment, and prepare for the next chapter. Because the heart, when guided by God, always finds its way back.